Well, I'm from one of Austria's, a descendant of one of Austria's princely houses. We've had a family business for a few hundred years, always in the area of forestry.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started with this episode.
And I myself studied mechanical engineering and had the pleasure to manage a crisis for the family in 2014 and up to 2018. So that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
All right, that's interesting. So you were born in Austria, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit about your background when you were still smaller in Austria? And which city was that?
Well, I was born in Vienna, but I grew up in the northern part of Austria. It's called the Wood Quarter, where our estates were based. And I was there for my first 9 years of my life, and then I went to the UK to boarding school to get educated there. And then I came back for university.
All right. I'm trying to understand how the situation was there. Okay, I mean, what were you seeing around there in Austria when you were still maybe like around 17, 18? I'm trying to, of course, make a comparison to what we have today. Of course, we are going to go to what you are doing today, but we first of all want to get a bit of your background.
Yeah. Well, as I said, so with the age of 13, I went to boarding school to the UK, stayed there till I was 18, did my A-levels there. Always. And then for studying, I came back to Vienna and studied mechanical engineering. As I said before, the first 9 years I grew up in Austria, in the countryside. What it was like growing up, it's my mother was always a little wary of me spending too much time with the local kids. So sometimes I wasn't allowed to go to the playground, things like that. But otherwise than that, I guess I had a normal life for a kid growing up in an aristocratic family.
So what kind of play, in the playground you did mention, what kind of play were you playing there? Give us a picture of that.
Yeah, well, we have in our village, there's a local playground. There's like, there's the stuff you have in a playground, a swing and a sledge and all this kind of stuff where you can meet with the other kids and have some fun, essentially.
All right, that's beautiful. Okay, now let's come back to what you said before, that you help to manage the crisis in the family or something like that. If I get it, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, we had a crisis in our family business, which stemmed from a failed investment that the family did, and the investment turned out to be a fraud. So due to the structure of the investment, essentially to simplify it, our land was used as security for a loan to facilitate the investment. So the investment being a fraud meant that the banks called upon the security, which was our land. So that's what caused the crisis. Our family business, being in forestry, was based on the land we owned, basically. So that being in danger was a very, very big thing for us. And initially, back at the time, I was when we got to know about it, I was 24. It was in 2014. Actually, I was 25. Sorry, 25. It was in 2014, and I hadn't much to do with the family business back then. I was still a student, trying to study, and it was like the annual general meeting of the company that we had invested in. And my dad told me to come along, and I should have. He asked me to prepare some questions. I was really excited about it. You're young, you get to come along with your dad. You want to ask some good questions, of course, and not just something stupid. So, and we sat in the annual general meeting, and we had a new CEO came in just a few months prior, and at the AGM he announced that he discovered that the company is over-evaluated by a factor of about 7. So, you can imagine. My questions that I prepared were useless in that moment, so I didn't ask any. And so that's what kicked the whole thing off. And initially I was helping my dad as a translator. Most of the investors and the business was all in English. My dad doesn't speak much English. And as I was educated in the UK, I came along to translate for him, to facilitate the discussions with other investors and the CEO and things like that. And I have an older half brother. And in the beginning, my dad was managing the crisis with advice from my half brother and his wife. And this is how the crisis was being managed initially. And so that's maybe the first thing I did after I heard that we are in a crisis. I got myself a job to make sure I have some income in case everything goes down the drain. And that was pretty exciting for me as well, getting my first proper paid job in a company as a systems engineer at Rheinmetall. And from there I was busy, doing my studies, finishing my studies, doing my job, and helping my dad with translating till about July 2015, where my dad and my half brother decided to take a holiday for 2 weeks, not being reachable. And I remember this still quite vividly back then. I was in a beer garden in Munich with my colleagues after a meeting we had, and I get a call from our lawyer, and he asked me if I had read the email. And I was like, what are you talking about? What email should I have read? And he's like, well, read the email and call me back later. And I opened my email, and I had an email from my dad in my inbox with all the other investors and everybody involved in trying to restructure the fraudulent company, that he's going on a holiday and his younger son, Octavian, is going to take care of things for the next 2 weeks. I had no idea this was coming. So that was 2 very exciting weeks. I had no clue what I was doing. I spent 2 weeks just trying to say maybe and no to anything. So after those 2 weeks, when my father came back from holiday, our lawyer asked him to have a meeting with me and the lawyer in the lawyer's office, which we did. And at that time, our lawyer told my dad that he suggests that my dad hands over the crisis management to me, which was quite a surprise for both of us. And at the time, my dad just said, all right, then, if that's what you suggest, that's what we will do, and asked me if I'm ready to do this. And having no idea what I was getting myself into back then, I said, yes, of course. So that's how I ended up being the crisis manager.
That's very important now. Okay, just so we can have a bit of more background on it, how much was actually at stake here in this business? Is this family business that was at risk?
Well, the whole business. At the time when this started, it was a situation where it looked like we would lose everything. So going down to zero completely.
All right. Now, why do you think the lawyer suggested that you were? How old were you then? If
I was 26.
Okay, you were 26 and you were going to manage the crisis in the family now. Of course, the financial crisis related to business. Why do you think the lawyer decided to pick you to manage this crisis?
Well, there really wasn't someone else in the family. My dad was a bit already too old. He didn't speak the languages that were required to communicate properly. He was the one that made the investment. That's also in crisis management sometimes a big problem, that the person who made the decision that causes the crisis isn't necessarily the best pick to manage it, because you have, the person battles with things like denial. They don't want to accept at the beginning that it was a bad decision, or that you are in a crisis. So you need someone fresh usually. And my half brother had his own company and his family. So he said, I'm not managing this full on. I'm ready to advise and help out, but I'm not taking on the responsibilities. And essentially left me in the family as a suggestion. And the lawyer also, he did explain why he suggested me also, that he said it requires more energy, a younger person, someone who is prepared to work long hours and go the extra mile. And when you're older than 70, that's not so easy to do. So that's essentially the reasons behind it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. Of course, we're going to be looking at some of the way that you work to help your clients. But now we're just still talking about you, how you started, because this is important because you have passed through the experience before. That is why you are able to help people now. Okay.
Exactly.
But now, just to cut the long story short, what actually become the result at the end of the day? Were you able to manage it? Did you save the company? What happened?
All right. So it took about, so it started in 2015, and the crisis was full on for about 2 years. So it was a lot of meetings with the banks, with all kinds of people. We got in a private investigator to investigate everything, get a lot of information. That was very, very helpful. And the end result was I was very stubborn for 2 years, saying no. I took the job to save the family company, so a sale was not of interest to me. And there was also a little bit of luck with it, that forest land prices in Austria went up about 40% in the time that I was managing the crisis. So that was a very, very important part for us to later make the decision that we sold the family business in the end. Forestry in Austria has a very low yield. So on the value of your land and of your forest, you make about 1.5%, which when your land is used as collateral for loan, makes it very difficult to service the interest rates and then also pay back the loan long term. And with the prices going up in forest land, with a few other negotiations we had with the tax department in Austria and lots of other things, it was the best for us to sell. So we did that.
So at the end of the day, the family managed to get back something from the deal, right?
Yes, so when you talk in financial terms, at the loss that we encountered was about 40% of what was invested in the fraudulent company. So we recovered about 60%.
Now, just before we go into your strategy or how you help people and what are even the nature of family business crisis, some of the people that come to you, I want to ask you, when the lawyer nominated you as a crisis manager for the family business, did you feel you were prepared at the time? What did you do to be able to do this if that was your first time?
Well, I obviously felt that I was ready to do this for some reason. But as I said, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So was I prepared? Not at all. I had no idea what I was doing in the beginning. So it's what makes a crisis. A crisis is a really dangerous situation with a lot of time pressure, and there's a lot of at stake. So the pressure is high, and one of the main reasons I managed to get around it was also that I was still quite young and I could deal with the pressure. And what helped a lot was I started learning. I was like, okay, this is overwhelming. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to start reading. So I read a lot of books about crisis management or managing yourself properly. So in a crisis, you have scarce resources, and the biggest resource you have is yourself. So you need to be very careful with yourself. And I didn't do that for the first 6 months. I was very, not very careful with myself, and it did fire back after 6 months. So I had to make some changes. At the beginning, I wrote my master's thesis. I still kept my job that I had. And after 6 months of doing crisis management, working at my job and writing my master's thesis, I had to let something go. So I quit my job. focus on the crisis because it was too much. So yeah, to answer your question, I was not. I thought I was ready, but I was not really ready at all. And it's very difficult to be ready for a crisis.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Now, because this is your job now, you help people to, of course, manage the crisis so that they can come out of it successful. What would be your description of crisis in a family business? Help us understand that.
Well, so a family business adds a little bit more complexity to the whole topic of crisis than you have in other companies, because you have the crisis you can come from different areas. So if there's a crisis in your business, that's a business crisis. But you can also have crisis in your family, and they can, a crisis in the family can put the business into crisis as well, and vice versa, of course. So in our case, the business crisis triggered a crisis in the family itself as well. So while a family is a great resource, it is also a great danger. So to give you an example, in about 80% of wealth that is lost for a family, the reasons for it are from the family itself. So usually a crisis is triggered in the family that leads to them losing wealth. There's a study by, I can't remember the names of it was being done, but there were families interviewed and that lost their wealth and asked what the reasons were, and mostly it's due to the family members having some kind of crisis. They fight with each other. Succession planning wasn't set up. The family member in charge suddenly dies without anybody knowing what's going on in the family business, things like that. So that's what is really important in a family business, that you can have an external crisis, that is an external event that can trigger a crisis, and then you can have internal crises, which are internal events. And you can have them in the family business and the family.
All right. Now, taking back to this particular episode in your family, which sort of drag you into becoming a professional in this area, is there something that you could sort of think back to, maybe around you in Austria, of people that have similar situation and how they also came out of it? Because I understand after you have gotten this mission, I call it a mission, to save the family business, you needed to read, because you weren't really ready, but you were available to take up the challenge. Now you need to equip yourself with knowledge. So maybe at that time you also try to look around, either there are people that face similar situation. So help me with that, if there is something you find around.
No, so what was very important for me back then also was I got a mentor. So someone in our network, he is a crisis manager for a bank. So it wasn't necessarily a family business, but it was somebody with a lot of experience in managing crisis. So the tips he gave were very, very good. A friend of mine is a professional in asset recovery and research. So he helped a lot, and he was also a mentor to me that was very, very helpful. At the time I managed the crisis, I didn't look so much into other families that went through crisis. I managed to get a few mentors who had a similar situation. So another mentor I managed to acquire through at the time was someone who had a similar situation when he was young. He took over the family estate, also a forestry company, and they were also too much in debt. So he now works at the bank and gave me some input there. So quite a few bankers.
Okay, now for people who are maybe in similar situation like yours, and yet they have not got into that situation yet. The business have not yet burst, no?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand what you think can be the signs that something might be wrong, so that it can be fixed before it becomes a crisis.
Well, that's usually a bit difficult. I mean, it depends. So in crisis, you have three different kinds of crisis. You have a sustained crisis, that is an event that is reoccurring. That's an example, for example, would be that one of the family members takes drugs and ends up negatively in the press regularly. So that's something that happens at regular intervals. So it's a sustained crisis. You can have sudden crises, which are sudden events, also called black swan events, like COVID, for example, which we just had. Those are very difficult to see coming, which in the definition, because they're sudden. And then you have latent crises. Those are crises that build up slowly. Like, for example, a succession dispute in the family. At the beginning, might not trigger anything that's big or important, but it will build up, and there will come a point when it accelerates drastically and things blow up. So for sustained crises, usually that's very easy to deal with because it will be coming again, and it's pretty it happens again and again and again. Sudden crisis is something where you usually can't see it coming, so you have to have some kind of plan or practice in place that you can say, okay, when something, when shit hits the fan, we are ready. We do this. We are prepared. And a latent crisis is if you pay attention carefully to your family and the business, and there is certain signs where you can see, like, okay, the financials are starting to not look that good. Maybe it's time to get the business into a healthy situation. Certain things that can build up is, for example, in the family, in a business, if you have, say, one particular customer who's starting to become very large, and you have all your most your revenue from one customer, you need to think about, because then a crisis at the customer can lead you into crisis, because if he stops ordering, you have a problem. So it's things like that. And in the family, if you see family members are having very disputes, they stop talking to each other, things like that, that's something where you should start to invest in the family and make sure that it's healthy, and a healthy family is less likely to cause a crisis.
Now, there is a crisis in a family business. So how do you handle it? I mean, what do you tell people on how to go about managing? Because now you don't run away because of crisis. You need to handle it. That is why you are a mature adult. Huh?
Yeah.
So, but how do you do that?
The thing, every crisis is unique. Every family is unique, and thus the family business is unique. So it's difficult to have like a go-to tool set where you say, okay, this works for everybody. But there's a few pointers that you can generalize. So first is that a crisis can be something that gets the family closer together, or they go apart. So it's important to use the crisis as you would call it, an attractor that brings the family closer together. So you can say, okay, our family, our mission right now as family is we need to get through the crisis. This is what we want to achieve. And that can make sure that people leave their disputes apart a little bit. Well, if the crisis happens in the family because people are having a dispute, then it gets a bit more tricky, because then the crisis is something that's breaking the family apart. So it's important to facilitate discussions, get a mediator in quickly to help family members talk again and try and work towards solutions. If the crisis is in the family business, that's a bit easier to handle. That's more managerial. You can set up certain plans. You can start working on the financials of the business and make sure that crisis doesn't cause a crisis in the family. But most of the time, as I said at the beginning, it's the other way around. The crisis starts in the family, causing financial losses in the business or the wealth. So yeah, it starts with talking to each other. There's a lot of families where tough conversations aren't held. People don't speak about certain things. Things are pushed under the rug, as you would say, and those things, they can fester and blow up at some point. So healthy communication is like the most important thing that you should start off with.
Yeah, it's true. Communication is everything.
Yeah.
All right. Now, based on your work, because you have worked with different clients, has it happened that at a point you just give up because you couldn't resolve the crisis? I mean, are there a limit to what we can try to resolve a crisis at a point we just leave it like that, let it go?
Yeah. So also again, you have different stages of a crisis. At the beginning, it's an emergency. That's the term you would use. So it's a situation where you're a bit in a pickle, but things aren't really dangerous yet. And from an emergency, you can go into a crisis, where you still have a chance to fight. And the next you would call it a disaster. And when you have a disaster, you're at a point where usually it ends in, let's say, a business liquidation. So you sell, or it goes into bankruptcy. That's usually when you have a disaster. As long as you can still restructure, there's still things to save. But sometimes as you would go in a conversation to say we agree to disagree, it's especially in a family when things are too broken and the pressure is on financially as well. You can get into an either or situation where you say, okay, we can save the family connections, or we can save the wealth, and it's difficult to combine both at the same time. As I said, every family is different in their own ways, and to solve a family crisis, and people need to want to solve it. And I mean, if you get in a crisis manager or a mediator to facilitate conversation and get people to work together, we're not therapists. If there's some very deep problems and people don't want to work on them and cause havoc, then it can come to a point where you say, okay, that's it. There's nothing really we can do anymore. Similar to in our family, with the story I told you at the beginning, we had to sell because we couldn't. It wouldn't have been financially doable for us to do a restructuring of the company, to pay off the debt and so on and so forth. At the time, looking back at it now, there could have been some ways that we could have tried that or the family, we all didn't know about. Things like you get litigation finances. So you get somebody to litigate to finance your litigation against people if you don't have the cash to pay lawyers. Didn't know that exists, for example. So there is a lot of ways with creativity, but there are some things when you look at it and say, okay, it's not worth it any longer, and then you let it go.
Okay, now you have traveled to the UK. I want to believe that you have also seen some other European country, no? I live in Italy. I know that a lot of businesses in Italy are actually family based. That is based on the structure. Italy is a very family oriented people.
Yeah.
For this reason, a lot of businesses are owned by family. And sometimes it can be very good because there is a blood connection. But sometimes it can also be very complex because you need to network a very fine line that tie the family together. And when something goes wrong, it doesn't affect only you, it affects the entire family. Of course, in the case you are also giving on. So I want to understand if maybe Austria is similar to what you might find in Italy, or maybe in other part of the European country that you have seen. Let me understand that.
Well, again, so most countries in Europe have mainly family businesses as the biggest contributor. So I think it's usually between 70 and 90% of businesses are family businesses. That's roughly, and they account for usually half the workforce and half of the GDP of a country. So that's some numbers roughly thrown in, and it depends from country to country. Obviously, Italy, as you said, are very close people, very very familiar. I'm half Italian, so I can't. My mother comes from Italy, so it is always the family. Is very important. But again, in Italy, you have very patriarchal structures. So usually the patriarch does whatever he wants with the family business, and that's how it is done. And Austria is a little different, but very similar in that respect to Italy. And family businesses are essentially, the culture in Europe is very, very similar to most countries, and the problems are essentially the same everywhere, just in a different color, I would say. The basis is the same, the same issue, but the way people speak and the way disputes happen differs from country to country, but at the base.
All right. Now, another thing I would like to understand is it easier to resolve a business that is tied to the family, a family business, as it were, or a crisis that have nothing to do with family? Maybe, for example, you enter into a partnership with a friend. Of course, there is no blood connection here. So when a crisis happens in that case versus when it happens within a family connection, what are the differences in resolving them?
Well, usually a family business, when you have a crisis in the business, they are more resilient. They get through crisis better. It depends, though, very much on the family connection. So if you have good storytelling, for example, in your family about the family legacy, and people are very connected to that, the family is very strong in dealing with crisis. And when you have like a business with a friend, those connections are often not as strong as a family connection, and they shatter, and then you have trouble with the owners. So, as I said, a crisis can also be an attractor for the family to move closer together and work on a common goal. It is a family. It is the family's wealth, so they work on it together. Well, in a partnership, at some point, it does happen that each of the partners starts to fight for his own. And especially depending on what caused the crisis, it gets tricky. Say one of the partners made a bad decision that caused the crisis. That's a very tricky situation to manage in a partnership business, for example. So I do believe family businesses are better equipped to go through crisis than other types of businesses.
Now, looking at the client that you have worked with, can you give me a case study, of course, without revealing sensitive information, of a family business that was in crisis, they come to you to help them, and you have actually helped them to resolve it? Please go ahead and share that with us.
Well, I've won. So I'm more of I speak and I do workshops, so I don't come into family businesses to manage a crisis for them, usually. I did it for one of my friends, pro bono. He had a crisis during COVID, and I said, okay, I will come in with you, help you more. And he had a very tricky situation. His dad died in November or December. I can't remember the exact date of prior to COVID. So he was taking over the company completely on his own, and then COVID came. And in his business, COVID really struck very strongly. He was down 80% revenue. So for him, it was a very difficult situation, because he wasn't sure if the family business was something he wanted to continue doing. He wasn't that much into the business, so that his father founded it, and he came in to work with the father. So that's when you usually say it becomes a family business. So he was second generation. And he not only had the trouble to find his own motivation, but the pressure was very high. A lot was at stake. All the family, like everything was in the family business. All the family assets were used as collateral for securing financing, and they were, as a family, completely maxed out. So he was under a lot of pressure. And so what as I said in the beginning, you yourself are the most important resource when you manage a crisis. So we worked on things like that. He had to look after himself, make sure that he has some time in the morning and time before going to bed where you don't read emails and you look at your phone and things like that. So you need to take some time out for yourself to prepare yourself for the day, and then prepare yourself for going to bed, because sleep is the most important way to recharge and get your energy back. And so what we did work on a lot together was to see if saving the family business was the right move to do, or if selling it was the right thing to do. So we looked at what was important for the other family members, what was important for him, how could he try and save it. So he had some ideas. So we first tried to see if he could save the family business. Things didn't work out that were tried. So we came to the point where we said, okay, look, this is not really what I want to do. So I said, okay, if it's not what you want to do, and you want to spend your life on, and you have passion for, and then let it go. So then we worked on how can he go about selling it, and I told him he needs to have a conversation with the other family members. Everybody in the family was for selling rather than fighting for it. So that's the direction it then took.
How was it at the end of the day? Is he happy as a person?
Yes, he's very happy that he is not working in the industry anymore. The crisis isn't, let's say, over yet. There's still some financial consequences that are coming with it, discussion with the banks. But he is now building up a new life with his wife together, and he's getting more involved in her business, which is what do you call it? Sometimes English terminology doesn't come to me that easily. They grow horses, and so that's now a completely new thing, and he's very motivated getting into it, and he's more of a philosophical person rather than a manager. Yes,
that's lovely. That is transformational.
Yes.
All right. Before, we were saying that a lot of European countries have these family businesses now, which is a very good thing, because like you said, it gives you a strong bond to work together, to build together, and to live something together, especially maybe you have, like you said, let me use your word, if that is a family narration, we sort of, because now you are just one, or even though you might have different diversion in it. But what I'm also trying to understand here now, if there are some danger hidden within family businesses that people should be aware of.
Well, of course. So the danger is always that while the family is a very strong bond, at the same time, if there's problems in the family, it can go over to the family business, and it usually starts with, for example, as you said, the family narrative. There's some studies on it that if you have a family narrative about the family business, you need to make sure it's about the family, how the family has tackled things in the past, how we tackle things, etc. If the narrative is about the founder of the family business, be it that's your father, your grandfather, or even longer back, the next generation isn't really motivated to get involved with the family business. So that's one danger. Also, another danger from a managerial point is, if your families tend to have someone from the family do the operational management in the company. But in some generations, there isn't anybody that should be doing it because there's no one qualified or interested in it. So it is important that you then say, okay, then we'll get an outside manager, because the family are essentially the owners behind the company. They're the heart and the soul of the company that drives it forward, but you don't necessarily need to have a family member in charge of the managing of that company. And that's a mistake that you see quite often, that family members are forced into the position, or you have a family member that really wants to do the position, but the person isn't qualified or isn't the right fit for the position. So that's also a danger, that you force the family into operational roles where they're not best suited for. So, and the next thing is, in the succession plan is very important in general. So a lot of crisis in families happens because the succession isn't planned. And succession planning begins when a new kid is born in the family. So ideally, you plan succession when your grandkids come along. So, and if you're first generation family business, the moment you have children, you need to plan for succession. You need to start teaching them about the family business in obviously in the right way. You know, a 9-year-old is not going to understand how to read the books of the company, but you know, transporting what the family is about, the values, the whole family story, the narrative, and have your kids do internships in the summer in the company to understand if this what the family is about, what the business is about, and to understand if they want to do this later on, if they want to work in the family business or if they rather do something else. So and accept it. So when people say, okay, I'm fine owning the family business, but I don't want to have a role in the family business. I'm a designer and I rather design socks, then that's what you prefer to do than work in a machinery business, for example. So those are the dangers with succession planning, the managerial role, and that, you know, if a dispute happens in the family of some sort, it can move into the family business. Those are the dangers you have in the family.
We hope that there should not be crisis in family businesses, no, but sometimes you cannot avoid it. Yeah. In the eventuality that there are this danger, I'm trying to understand what are the best strategy to make sure that the family come out successful in it. Yeah. Help us with that.
Well, first of all, there's a few things that are important. Number one is keep the family informed about the progress of the crisis management in the family business. So you have a lot of family members. They're all stakeholders in the business, but they might not have operational roles. They might be doing some other kinds of jobs, and that diversity is really important because they can have ideas, very creative ideas, to solve the crisis, which people in the family business might not have because they're too stuck in the problem. They see it up front too much. That's something a mistake we made, that at some point I, as a crisis manager, didn't inform the family as much as I should have. So from my own personal experience, keep the family informed at regular basis, because it's a resource you can use, a very good resource usually. Second thing, I mean, if you have a family business, if any business should have a crisis management plan where you say, okay, if this and that happens, this is what we do. You should have a crisis management team in the family business that those are designated people that take over certain tasks once a crisis hits. And at the same time, you should have a crisis management committee in the family where you say, okay, which are family members who are prepared to get more involved in the business the moment we have a crisis and we need the additional manpower and resource. And so when a crisis hits, for the family to come out stronger than before, it's all about how the family connects during it. So as I said, have some meetings, get everybody involved, work together on it. If you have a crisis management plan in place, it's very, very helpful to act quickly. So it's, in crisis you usually have not a lot of time. But you have more time than you think usually. It's something that the Navy SEALs use a lot. So if you think you have a second to make a decision, you usually can say that you have a minute to think about it. And if you think you need to decide within a minute, it's an hour. So, and that's something that also the family will probably learn in a crisis. So the moment you come out of a crisis, usually you come out stronger. You learn that you learn to manage difficult decisions better. So the family will improve their decision-making capabilities from a crisis, because in a crisis you have to make tons and tons of decisions all day long, and hard ones at the time. So you will improve your decision-making capabilities. And the family should usually have moved closer together. The family bond is stronger, and a crisis is really good material for a family narrative. So if you have a family story dating back a few generations, and there is a crisis in one of the generations, that makes really good story. It can increase the family narrative and the family bond in the future if you use it properly. So that's probably the number one strength that comes out of a crisis for the family.
That's important. I like the thing that we're talking about now. That life is not just a straight line, all good, all good, all good. No, there are some times that it is bad. Yes, like you said, those bad moments, we need to use it to reflect and retell our story and reshape the story. But if it is just good all the time, very soon we lose track of people where we are coming from.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you know Eckhart Tolle, the writer, Power of Now. He says something very powerful, which I love. And in order to appreciate the good times, you need to live through the bad times as well. Otherwise, you won't appreciate the good times.
That's it. I love that. All right. Now, in practical sense, how do you help your clients, people who need help in terms of how to manage family crisis?
Well, as I said, at the moment, I do this more through, I write a blog where I write about these topics. I do some research into it. I speak about the topic openly. That's my number one. One of my missions is to get families to speak about this topic, to be open about it. As we said, most of the families lose their wealth because of the family itself. And behavioral risk is overlooked in most families. People spend a lot on having managed, like consultants come into their business to make the business more resilient, but there's no money or little money spent on making the family more resilient. So I want to raise awareness for this topic, and I'm one of the founding members of Family Hippocampus with 3 other very bright individuals, where we do a lot of research on the whole topic of family dynamics, also crisis management in families, succession planning for families. And so what we do is we try and find solutions and ways for families to facilitate these discussions, to become more resilient as a group, to become more closer together, more harmonic as a group, and understand each other better.
Thank you so much for that, there, Octavian. Now, I want you to use this moment to promote what you're doing, connect with people. Those who want to connect with you, want to benefit from what you do. Tell them how to reach you. Go ahead.
Well, if you want to reach me, add me on LinkedIn, send me a message there, or you can, if you want to read a bit about what I write about and do, go on my blog, octavianpilati.com, and have a little look at that. Otherwise, if you are in a family business or from a family office, you might see me at one of the European conferences where I usually speak about these kind of things.
All right. Now, what would be your recommendation to people who can possibly be in crisis, or those who are already in crisis? What do you want to say to them?
Well, as I said before, remember, you yourself are your number one resource, and look after yourself. If you don't sleep enough, if you eat badly, if you're stressed out, you will make bad decisions, and those decisions will be bad for saving the company or your family or whatever crisis you're living through. So take time for yourself, look after yourself. The second recommendation, as I also said, is crisis is a very high pressure situation. You have limited resources. Also, usually you are under high time pressure. But again, you have more time to make a decision than you think you do. Things are not as urgent as other people may make it seem, or as you might think in the first beginning. So as I said, take your time for important decisions. Make them at the right time of the day. So if you're tired in the evening, don't make any decisions. There's no point in doing that. And the third recommendation, especially for family businesses, which is something that I learned the painful way because our family situation isn't so good after the crisis. The family is more important than the business. Families, especially if you have a family business with a legacy, you have some social capital from the past. And if you keep the family together, you can lose all your wealth, you will bounce back. But the family should go first.
That's very important. It's a good advice. Is there any other thing you would like to add to the conversation? Maybe something passionate to you that I didn't ask you, or something you feel can be a message to conclude it. Please go ahead and do that.
Oh, wow. No, I think I would stick with what I said last. I think that's the most important thing is what I learned. Family is more important than business and money. And make sure you take the time for your family and you include them in the decision process when the financial consequences are a consequence for all of the family. They all should know about it and have a little bit of a say in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, Octavian, thank you so much. This has been really an interesting conversation. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewafo. Thank you so much for listening and talk to you in the next episode.